1800s, all blacks are inferior to whites. 1940s, all Japanese are spies. 2000s, all Muslims are terrorists. Because categorical discrimination, like the historical examples just mentioned, is unjustified under any circumstance, my partner and I negate resolved. Ethnic profiling is a just means of combating terrorism. Ethnic profiling is defined by Black's Law Dictionary as the consideration of race, ethnicity, or national origin by an officer of the law in deciding when and how to intervene in an enforcement capacity. The word just is defined by the Merriam-Webster Dictionary as acting or being in conformity with what is morally upright or good. The word means is defined by Merriam-Webster Dictionary as something useful or helpful to a desired end. An observation we would like to make is that even if a means achieves a good purpose, it does not prove that the means is just. However, if an action does not promote the desired end, in this case combating terrorism, it cannot be a just means. Thus, our thesis is that ethnic profiling is not a just means of combating terrorism because first, it is ineffective, and second, it is unethical. Contention 1. Ethnic profiling simply does not work. A quick look at population demographics shows that ethnic profiling is statistically doomed to fail. Mike German, in a Cato Institute study, indicates that if profiling was targeted at Arab Americans to identify Muslims, only 1 in 4 would turn out to be Muslim. The vast majority, 63%, are actually Christian. The Muslim population in America is composed of various backgrounds and cultures. Asians, African Americans, and Arabs make up nearly 30% each of the total Muslim population. Thus, if we wanted to thwart terrorism, we would end up profiling a superfluous number of people, rendering the action ineffective. Furthermore, terrorists don't fit a single profile. Many terrorists come from Europe or from within the United States. For example, Umar, the famous underwear bomber, was Nigerian, and Colleen LaRose, the Jihad Jane, was a radicalized blue-eyed blonde American. Richard Reed, the shoe bomber who pled guilty to 8 counts of terrorism, was white and Jamaican, and Tim McVeigh, the Oklahoma City bomber, was white as well. If ethnic profiling is used, terrorist organizations are likely to try to recruit people from outside the Middle East and Southeast Asia. This analysis holds empirically true. In a study with the University of Texas, William Press concluded that profiling based on race was no more effective at finding terrorists than random screening. Thus, ethnic profiling in terms of religion and race is impossible to use to consistently combat terrorism. If it were widely implemented, terrorists would simply recruit people who did not fit the type being profiled. Contention 2. Ethnic profiling is unjust because it is unethical. First, ethnic profiling is in direct violation with the 14th Amendment of the United States Constitution, which guarantees equality for all citizens. At the point where ethnic profiling by definition is an unequal approach, it targets select citizens of a certain religion or race and is therefore unlawful. Second, ethnic profiling creates backlash against the entire Arab Muslim community. In his book Islam and Muslims in the Post-9/11 America, Abdul Ghalisi explains, Arabs and Muslims' constitutional rights to free exercise of religion and assembly, due process and security from unreasonable searches and seizures have been violated. The erosion of civil rights came in the form of various programs and legislations, such as the USA Patriot Act, which effectively nullifies Amendments 4, 5, 6, and 8 directly, and indirectly Amendments 1 and 9. The fallout has impacted the daily lives of Muslims at schools, in the workplace, in general public encounters, and mistreatment at the hand of federal officials. Many Muslim homes and businesses were raided, while profiling-based interrogations and searches became a norm. In that book, Ghalisi stated that Muslim communities in California were troubled that each of the FBI's 56 regional field offices were based in Muslim communities to investigate terrorism. Thus, Muslims are unjustly targeted as a result of ethnic profiling, which impacts the rest of their lives. Even if ethnic profiling is targeted to be used only against those who pose a serious threat, this is not the perception amongst Americans. The perception ethnic profiling creates is that a certain race or religion is dangerous, rationalizing and normalizing racism. Because of this perception, Muslims are unfairly discriminated against in the workforce and have their rights substantially reduced. Thus, because it is not a means at all to combating terrorism, since it is unlikely to succeed and it is unethical and immoral, ethnic profiling can never be justified. Therefore, we urge a con ballot.
All right. Sorry. Opponents ready? And all 3 judges? Great. My partner and I affirm the resolution, ethnic profiling is a just means of combating terrorism. Before I begin, we would like to make the following observations. Observation 1. Terrorists' main goal, by definition, is to instill fear to achieve an end. Observation 2. The use of ethnic profiling does not imply a reduction in any other screening methods, but rather is just an added tool to combat terrorism. With those observations in mind, we offer the following 3 contentions. Contention 1, statistically reduces terrorism. Terrorism is often effective because it seemingly consists of random acts of violence. But the mathematics of the power law curve have shown that these acts are not truly random, but can often be predicted. The math worked when applied to terrorist groups as diverse as the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia, Peru's Shining Path, the Palestinian Intifada, Taliban insurgents in Afghanistan, and rebels in East Timor. Because these acts are not random, law professor John Basnoff has shown that by applying the mathematical Goldilocks principle to secondary searches at airports, we would substantially improve the likelihood that we will detect and stop terrorist passengers trying to board. It would also speed up the process and reduce costs, he notes. Mathematically, this would mean it would be optimal to screen individuals in proportion to the square root of their presumed probability of risk. In other words, a group deemed 9 times as likely as the average traveler to be a terrorist would be subject to 3 times as many screenings. Banzoff offers this analogy. Most women over 40 don't have breast cancer, and some younger women do, as well as a few men. Nevertheless, we commonly focus our screening only on older women or those with very high risk factors. Ethnic profiling offers the ability to improve our sample set while maintaining the value of other screening techniques. So ethnic screening is another tool to help fight terrorism. Contention 2 decreases fear. The introduction of ethnic profiling would not only decrease the likelihood of an attack, but it would also decrease the fear of an attack. According to a Gallup poll, 71% of Americans support the idea of considering the ethnicity of a passenger as a potential sign of being a terrorist, and it calls for very careful examination. Thus, if we were to implement these policies, similar percentages of Americans would feel safer. The impact of this is threefold. 1, by reducing fear of terrorists, we inherently reduce the impact of terrorism because terrorism's main goal is to instill fear. 2, the ability to think critically, such as about policy choices, is improved according to Priscilla Lewis of the World Initiative. And 3, rational threat analysis is improved, continues Dr. Lewis. Contention 3, minimal negative impacts. Some may assert that this process of ethnic profiling would cause a negative backlash, but that's only in the case of extreme and indiscriminate ethnic profiling. With the Goldilocks approach, there is a nearly unnoticeable impact to any one individual, while maintaining the significant statistical improvement in terrorist detection. The standard you need to hold a con team to is, does any of their evidence about backlash or other negative impacts apply to this application of ethnic profiling specifically? We need to be realistic about protecting our right to life while we strive to protect our rights of liberty and the pursuit of happiness. In fact, Professor Banzoff further states that ethnic profiling is constitutional if done in accordance with the guidelines the United States Supreme Court has laid down. The court has frequently held that the government may consider race if it is reasonably necessary to further what the court has called a compelling state interest. My partner and I believe that we have conclusively proven that there is compelling state interest, and thus if the governments that are responsible for upholding our civil rights deem something like this just, we see that the ethnic profiling is actually a beneficial solution and is not infringing upon our rights. Because of this, my partner and I urge an affirmative ballot. Thank you. So I believe you have first question as soon as the judges are ready.
Judges ready? All right. What is this Goldilocks approach that you talk about?
All right, this was what it is you're going to find a statistic of what percentage of each ethnicity is most likely to be a terrorist. Now, you're going to take the square root of that probability, and that's how frequently you're going to screen these people. I don't understand the exact complex math of it, but that's the idea.
All right. And if we have two methods that work equally well, one with additional harms and one without additional harms, which do we choose?
Prove to me that there's a better solution.
No, I say, okay, I'm not going to try and prove to you right now that there's a better solution, but
Why
if I
not?
propose to you...
I don't want to talk about hypothetical situations unless you can provide me an actual tangible...
I just want to ask you a question. I don't want to really debate you right now.
I don't see... Well, okay, if they have equal impacts, why can't we apply them both? And, I mean, if we apply them both, then we should get different errors. Then we should
my question is, if they have equal beneficial impacts, but one has added harms to it, what do we choose?
Give me... I don't want to spend this idea of...
So if I prove to you that, like, random screening is going to be just as effective as screening, like, ethnic.
It depends. First, is it a comparative statistic? Second, is it mentioning the Goldilocks principle? And it's not just let's line up all, say, Arab men in a line, because that's useless. Because, like you said, 63% of Muslims are.
So, are you talking about techniques that are currently used?
I mean, obviously not. Ethnic profiling is not used.
I mean, like, okay, so do you have any examples of where it has been used?
Yes, I do, actually. When we look to, let me just reread these for you. I mentioned them in my case. The Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia, Peru's Shining Path, the Palestinian Intifada, the Taliban insurgents in Afghanistan, and the rebels in East Timor, all have been used successfully. So if all the evidence is pointing to this, why wouldn't we use it? It's like, if we wanted to see how to strategically reduce terrorism, which is saving so many lives, why wouldn't we do this? Isn't this the most beneficial solution?
I mean, that's what we're here to debate, isn't it?
Exactly. So tell me it is or it isn't.
Well, obviously, I have arguments that are not supposed to, but, like, you're supposed to be asking me questions.
I mean, you asked me a question, so I'm responding. Do you have any evidence that this Goldilocks principle is actually...
our case outright states that they're equally effective.
Most of your examples are, first off, based on totally Arab or Muslim, and it's also indiscriminate screening. In addition, does the resolution specify a country?
But I'd argue, since the overall theme of, like, the debate we're here...
Does the resolution specify...
The security liberty debates are supposed to obviously be in reference to the United States, right?
No, we're talking about keeping the rights of people and the safety of people all over the world.
So give me an example where you would screen a different set of people in a different country.
I'm not saying that you're necessarily going to be screening different people, but I'm saying that you have to provide us with examples that aren't just, say, the United States. Or if you do, you really have to weigh the fact that that's one country and there's all the rest in the world. And you really have to take our evidence, which is giving you all these examples of it being successful in all these other countries,
aren't you
over
basically
that one
just, like,
example.
saying, like, why your case is, like, why, like, you have these examples and I don't? Like, I mean, I'm asking you, like, why is it, like, that I have, like, I'm asking you for example of where it would be used in a different situation.
I'm saying it could be used in all countries reducing terrorism, and
right.
Sorry, but that's...
All right, I mean, okay. We'll take prep time. Uh, 35 seconds used.
I'll just be starting at the top of the pro case. Judges ready? Opponents ready? Okay. At their second observation, our opponents say that it doesn't necessarily mean you're reducing other methods. However, this is completely flawed because there are a limited number of resources. We don't have an ever-expanding supply of money. If we're going to use ethnic profiling, that means we're going to be compromising on some other resources, meaning we can't allocate our resources to using those methods. So there has to be some sort of trade-off here in that if you're using ethnic profiling, you're not using another approach. But we're going to show you how other approaches by themselves are better without ethnic profiling than with ethnic profiling. Then on our contention one, she says statistically it's ethnic profiling is going to work. However, this is a mathematical analysis that's applied to a hypothetical situation. She's saying we can use this and statistically it should come out better. However, statistically in the past, it has not come out better. You can cross-apply our study done by the University of Texas. If they want the specific methodology for that, that's fine. We have it on us. That said, that ethnic profiling produced the same result. It led to as many terrorists as completely random screening. Furthermore, in the book we received today, David Cole has stated 98% of the people screened turned out that were thought to be terrorists turned out not to be terrorists. Ethnic profiling is not effective at all. But furthermore, behavioral profiling is more effective without ethnic profiling than with ethnic profiling. There is a difference between ethnic profiling and behavioral profiling. Behavioral profiling has a high efficiency rate. Quote, by the University by the Commissioner of U.S. Customs, Raymond Kelly, in 1999, when the Customs Service abandoned profile based on ethnicity and instituted and focused on behavior, its productivity and efficiency soared. The number of searches declined from 10,000 to 2,000, but the percentage of terrorists found actually increased. So when we take ethnicity out of the equation, behavioral profiling and other methods of profiling actually lead to capturing more terrorists than with ethnic profiling. The only side effect that happens with ethnic profiling is creating a racist sentiment. They even said in their Goldilocks method, we're going to identify a group and determine their risk for terrorism. That inherently leads to racism because you're isolating and marginalizing a specific group, and you're saying this group has a terrorist threat. So when they say that this won't lead to anti-racist sentiment and it'll actually minimize negative impacts, it's actually going to maximize negative impacts because the American public is going to view that one group as dangerous. Like under the Goldilocks method, they're doomed 9 times as likely to commit terrorism. Let's stay away from that group. Don't give that group jobs. Don't give them rights. That's inherently unjust because the definition of just is defined as moral actions. If you're marginalizing one group and if you're creating a distinction between one group and another, that's inherently immoral. But then go down to the second contention where she says it decreases fear. It doesn't decrease fear. It actually increases fear because of the reason I just mentioned. Because you're pointing out a specific group, it increases fear of that group. And that one group is 9 times as likely to commit terrorism than another group. Let's pay close attention to that group. You can cross-apply our second contention, which this is what has happened in the past. The FBI has located all 56 of its offices in California in Muslim-located communities. That has created outrage in the Muslim population in that they're saying that all these Muslims are deemed to be a potential of a terrorist threat. So in the past, empirically, it is shown to actually increase negative impacts. Then she said that 71% support, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's just because the American population, 71% of it supports it, doesn't necessarily mean it's just. People supported slavery at one time. That doesn't necessarily mean it's just. But it increases racism, which is why it's unjust. Then on their contention 3, they talked about minimal negative impacts, but you can cross-apply contention 2, which shows you empirical negative impacts of ethnic profiling. Then they talk about how it's legal under the Supreme Court. However, the Supreme Court has stated has condemned ethnic profiling against African Americans because of the phobia it creates against this race. The Supreme Court has in previous cases condemned ethnic profiling. For all these reasons, I urge a con ballot.
Could I take about 45 seconds of prep time? Actually, edit that to 30, and if I go past that, I'll just keep timing. Thank you. I got about 40 seconds to use. Before I begin, I'd like to give a brief roadmap. I'm going to go over the framework of today's debate and then their contentions point by point, straight down the flow. Is everyone ready? Let's begin. First of all, looking to the overall framework of today's debate, what the pro is arguing is that ethnic profiling is just another added tool in the toolbox of counterterrorism authorities. It's not simply one that's exclusive, and I'll explain the microeconomics behind this in a minute. While all we're doing is justifying ethnic profiling on its own, not necessarily a decrease in other things. We're not looking to that. We're just only focusing on the resolution. Furthermore, the framework in today's debate is not confined to the United States. There are very important examples in other countries where ethnic profiling has been used, and we should investigate in order to determine how ethnic profiling could be used in the United States. So that's why we're going to look to other nations' examples as well. Go to their first point, that simply ethnic profiling is ineffective. Well, first of all, you could cross-apply our first contention, which says that it statistically reduces terrorism, and you could also go on to our second contention, which says this decreases fear. But even if you don't buy those arguments, I can offer additional ones to say this. First of all, ethnic profiling is most effective when it targets known terrorists. It's very difficult for Osama bin Laden and Khalid Sheikh Mohammed to change their ethnicity. Thus, what we're doing is we're identifying known agents who oppose us and known terrorists and solve them, saying, all right, here's the FBI's most wanted list, people that look like this, pull them aside, check them out. And if they're not, fine, let them go. But what we're arguing here is very specifically applied ethnic profiling. All of the examples our opponents are relying on to warrant their case rely on the fact that indiscriminate racist profiling was being used. And I want to make this important distinction. Racism is not the same thing as special attention towards ethnicity. Racism is the indiscriminate, irrational, hateful, as we say, approach to a person that isn't based on something. It's based on a bias, whereas ethnic distinction is just simply acknowledging that there are differences. Now, this is why it's effective. All right, first of all, go on to their specific point, saying Jihad Jane. Now, and then a next one saying a report from Texas that it doesn't work. Well, we gave you 6 instances: the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia, Peru's Shining Path, the Palestinian Intifada, Taliban insurgents in Afghanistan, and rebels in East Timor, and in the United States. Ethnic profiling has been used since 2004, and there have not been any significant terrorist attacks since 2004. So we can see in all of these 7 examples, there hasn't been significant terrorism. So when they pose the question, where's our evidence supporting this? That's the evidence that it works. Their evidence that Jihad Jane, that doesn't necessarily negate what we're saying. We're saying there are specific mathematical methods that can be applied to identifying which ethnicities are more likely to contain terrorists. It's not irrational. It's based on mathematics. It's based on both the power curve principle and, second, the Goldilocks principle, both came up with by Basnov, MIT professor. So it's not indiscriminate uses. You go on to their second contention saying it's unethical. First of all, like I said a moment ago, it's not random uses. We have warrants for them. But specifically underneath it, they said it doesn't abide by U.S. law. And then second of all, it's unlawful. Well, if we're going to just determine today's round of what is lawful and what isn't lawful, today's debate would really be unproductive here because we wouldn't be actually analyzing whether something's true or false. All we'd be doing is deferring our own judgment to some law. But furthermore, a law analysis isn't even correct. If we look at the way the resolution is worded, it says terrorism is a just means. The key word here, obviously, is just. And we're not going to just defer to the law by saying what is just and unjust. Laws can be unjust all the time. There used to be laws against civil rights, but we overturn those. The law right now prohibiting, first of all, there aren't laws prohibiting, but if there was a law prohibiting ethnic profiling, it might be unjust. So we're here today to talk about that. They went on to say that it is a rationalization of racism and endorsement of racism, but I've already made the distinction that this is not applied indiscriminately. The TSA has 11 different techniques that they use, including the Goldilocks principle and the power curve, that warrant with specific evidence-based investigation which ethnicities are more likely. So it's not rationalizing hateful means against ethnicities. That's racism. That's what they're saying. It doesn't do that. It's simply not having an impact. Look to our third contention. It says the minimal negative impacts. The backlash at worst could not be that bad. As in the United States, according to The Economist in August 2010, there is relatively less Islamophobia in the United States than there are in other countries which also practice ethnic profiling. Thus, you have 6 independent reasons to vote pro. Ready?
Judges ready? Ready? I believe I have first question.
Yes.
Right. Who's to say that if we target a particular ethnic group, that terrorists won't just recruit outside of the group being profiled?
Well, first of all, if we target the group and disband the group effectively, it can't really recruit more members because it's gone in the first place.
Where do you say that ethnic profiling is going to lead to the dismantlement of that group?
Well, as we said in our first contention, it statistically reduces terrorism because it reduces the efficacy of the group. If, for example, let's say
Did you respond to our study that stated
Yep.
that it's as effective as random screening?
Okay, well, that doesn't matter. We're just arguing that it's an added tool.
Okay, has the math in the Goldilocks method ever been applied?
Yes, in 6
Where?
different instances by MIT professor Basnov. I listed them out in my last speech.
I believe when you read your case, you said this would happen. Like the word would
No.
was specifically in all of those examples.
We must have misspoken. These studies were conducted to determine the efficacy, specifically the efficacy of ethnic profiling compared to other things. And it determined that it is ethnic profiling alone that was able to disband the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia, Peru's Shining Path, Palestinian
How does that
Intifada
apply to
groups.
the United States?
Well, first of all, I said in the United States, when ethnic profiling exists, we haven't seen this tremendous negative impact that you're saying we should
What about
fear.
the underwear bomber?
Excuse me?
Wasn't he a terrorist? The underwear bomber, which happened
Sure.
very recently?
Yes, of
So
course.
wasn't that a attempt at a terrorist attack that ethnic
Yeah.
profiling did not catch?
Sure. I'm not saying it's a 100% solves everything. I'm just saying it's very effective at combating certain groups. We can't have any single means that combats like a permanent fix for everything. It's just an added toolbox, and that's what these statistics show you. And second, all right, I would like to ask you about your rebuttal to our second contention that it decreases fear.
Okay.
What was that? What did you rebut it with?
Okay, I said that it increases fear towards the group that you're deeming to be more likely. Under the Goldilocks method, which your partner stated, we're deeming some group to be, like, say, 9 times or certain times likely to commit terrorism. That creates fear towards that group, and that marginalizes and is racist or stereotypical
All right, well,
towards that group.
First of all, the word racism here
Not
is completely
racism, say
not
it's
applied.
stereotypical.
Okay,
It's still
stereotypical.
unjust towards that
But,
group
all right,
because you're marginalizing
I understand.
that group.
Okay, my response is, well, first of all, statistically, we've proven that there's increased likelihood for there to be certain ethnicities that tend to contain
but if you look
the
to our
terrorists.
observation at the top
One
of our-
second. Could I have that? And furthermore, our contention that it decreases fear still stands, because I think you're misconstruing what we're saying.
Okay.
We're saying the average American, and many people around the world, according to a Gallup poll, actually 71% of Americans, just perceive the very fact that ethnic profiling is used, period, as good. They feel more safe. Regardless of the efficacy, it doesn't matter if it works in this case.
Okay.
We're just saying it decreases terrorism. And what does terrorism try to do?
And we stated that in our case...
What does terrorism try to do? Cause fear, right?
Right.
So if we can decrease fear, we're solving terrorism, aren't we?
No, but my analytics are saying that it increases fear towards those groups. It might decrease fear, like, overall towards a nation, but it increases fear of those particular groups.
Then-
marginalizing and being prejudiced towards our group, deliberately unjust.
Oh, could I ask a response question or no? We're out of time. Okay, that's cool.
Can I see the Goldilocks method?
Did we go over evidence after the round?
I would need it for my rebuttal.
Oh,
Is that okay?
Absolutely.
We'll just start prep time now.
Actually, wait. Can I get the method before I start prep time?
Okay. Yeah.
Well-
I mean, it could take me a moment because I have to get my laptop out. I mean, but I don't.
It's fun.
For the
And
record,
Are you guys okay with
Can I
that?
just see the empirical examples that you used in your case?
Which
I have
ones?
to get that out. as
The
well.
ones you used in your
The
case.
six
the 6
empirical
ones, yeah.
examples? Okay.
Do you want just the list or do you want the actual like?
The list is fine for your
Okay.
case.
I mean, here. I laid it.
Yes.
The ones that you read.
In the case.
Just where it starts, and I'll read from there.
There. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I'll begin.
Actually, you had a speech.
All right. 51 seconds used.
35 remaining.
All right. Starting. Starting on our opponent's first contention. Are all the judges ready? Opponents ready? All right. They continue to try and extend their statistics as saying this is a justifiable reason as to why you should vote pro for them. However, you're always going to be preferring our studies over theirs because our studies specifically are comparative in the way that they are not. They just specifically say that like ethnic profiling works, whereas we tell you that specifically random searches as well, and random searches work just as well. And if you look further down, where Deep read the behavioral profiling study, that works even better than ethnic profiling. They made absolutely no responses to this behavioral only profiling study, which means that you're always going to be preferring that in the round because not only does it work better, but it also avoids the harms that we're reading that exist with racial profiling. Then, you can go on to their argument about how it's going to be hard to change like the race of other terrorists. But our argument here comes from our contention 1, where we specifically tell you that if we're going to say that we're going to be targeting these specific groups of people, all terrorists have to go out and do is say that is go out and recruit other different people from different nationalities and different ethnicities to get them to do their work. So that is the way that terrorists will there's simply a way for terrorists to easily get around ethnic profiling, whereas behavioral profiling will definitely solve for this problem. But then they go on to say that like it's not being racist because we're not indiscriminately targeting targeting people of a certain ethnicity. But our argument isn't that the government is inherently going to be racist towards these individuals, but rather the fact that we are profiling creates a perception amongst the population of the country, which is what causes the racism. The people in the like, not all citizens are going to be well educated enough on this issue to know that we are, like, what specific methods we're using, so they will just feel that we are targeting the overall group, and as a result have racist sentiments towards that. That is where they're misunderstanding our argument. Our argument is about perception, not about government intentions. So that is where the racism still exists. And furthermore, you can go down to the third contention, where you can their third contention, where you can extend our Supreme Court study that shows you that the Supreme Court has ruled that it is unethical for us to use this. Then furthermore, go on to their argument about where they cite the 6 instances. I'd say that all they get up here and say is that they have used this sort of racial profiling and that there has been no terrorism, but they're not making the link for you as to why that is necessarily true. And finally, you're going to go on to the second contention about why it's unethical. Specifically, we cite the 14th Amendment, which was initially created to avoid these sort of racial disparities in our society, and because it violates that, we urge a con ballot.
Can I have run some prep time, please? Thank you.
Thanks. I'll keep looking.
All right, thank you.
Never mind.
All right, before I begin, I'm just going to give a brief roadmap. I'm just going to touch on some framework, then go over the main voter issues of today. Opponents ready? Yep. Yes. And all 3 judges? All right. First, I'd like to touch upon the idea of ethnic profiling just being an added tool. My opponents keep saying, no, you can't do that because the resources have to come from somewhere. However, when you look to simple microeconomics, you can take the funds from a third party. You're not necessarily taking the funds from behavioral screening. You can take it from somewhere else. And so there is no proof, nor is it likely that it will be taken from behavioral screening. So once again, this is just an added tool, and all their arguments saying they're better things that are more effective should be completely disregarded in today's round. Now let's go into the first voter issue, which is essentially that we statistically reduce terrorism. Now, we read again and again our 6 examples of this working. Now, my opponents keep saying, oh, it's hypothetical. You're just giving me, it's a math equation. It's going to work. No, we've given you 6, 7 examples of it being actually working. And once again, they say it's not comparative. Well, we show you that because we used ethnic profiling, we decreased the terrorism. So that's a concrete causation, and you really have to weigh that in today's round because we saved thousands of lives with these terrorist attacks. This has to be the highest weighed thing in today's round because we're saving lives. All of their arguments won't stand if we don't have people alive to have these morals and have all these ideas. Now let's move on to the second area, which is racism. Once again, as my partner stated, it's not racist. We have statistics that we're going to have constantly updated statistics regarding, say, X percentage of this ethnicity has this probability of being a terrorist versus and this one and this one and this one. And these are constantly updated, so terrorists, whatever they're changing to, the probability is, and the screening is updated as well. In addition, it is when we look to Islamophobia, countries that use ethnic profiling actually have a higher rate of fear. So once again, this doesn't actually encourage. It doesn't actually say that ethnic profiling is going to encourage it. Now, when we go on to the next fact, that is the media is actually the one who makes something racist or causes fear. A piece of legislation can't just say, we're going to make all Muslims stand in a separate line. No, it's the media interpretation, and that has no bearing on today's resolution. And because of those reasons, I urge an affirmative ballot. Thank you.
I believe you have the first question. Is everyone ready?
All right. Ready?
Yes.
Again, if we show you that there is a situation, like if you are still conceding to the fact that we have equally effective procedures, yet we are showing you that there are additional harms to yours, why do you win?
Because, well, A, we don't concede that there are additional harms, and once again, just because something may be more beneficial doesn't mean this one can still be beneficial in different ways. And because it's beneficial in different ways, even maybe not as effective if you want to go there, it's still going to be decreasing terrorism, as shown in our 6 examples.
Okay. So this is just.
And where did you respond to the argument that terrorists can simply recruit others?
others.
Oh, I explained that in my summary, where we're going to have statistics and we're going to have constantly updated surveys saying, say, X percent of Arabs have this probability
And
of
how do
being
you
a
apply
terrorist.
those statistics?
So it's simple. First of all, through the Goldilocks principle and the power curve
Yeah, but
principle.
like, how do you take those percentages from the Goldilocks principle and apply it to actual people?
Because you take the square root of someone's probability.
It's a percentage, though, right?
You
Yes.
can turn a percentage into
But also,
but how do you
here's-
apply a
one second.
specific percentage to a group of people?
Okay, that's easy. For example, all of the 9/11 terrorists were Arabic, so we can say 100% of them were all ethnically Arabic.
But
Thus,
are
there's
all
a
Arabics
correlation.
terrorists?
We're not
No,
saying
nor are we
we're
saying
not
we're
saying
going to-
causation. It's just
So
the
how
fact
do you
is,
prove that it will
excuse
be
me.
effective?
It's just the fact is there tends to be trends, as we've statistically shown, towards one ethnicity.
And what
It
happens
tends to
with
contain more
anomalies
terrorists.
of those trends, like the 6 examples we
Well,
cited
all right.
in our
There's
then-
anomalies with behavioral screening.
And also, with those anomalies, maybe ethnic profiling
But if we
doesn't solve.
prove to you
Excuse
that
me.
behavioral is more effective, then-
Maybe ethnic profiling doesn't solve for those anomalies. But the fact of the matter is, we are showing it is still a means. We're not showing it's the penultimate end-all 100% solving
All right.
means. It's still a means.
And you talk about how the media is the one who is turning this into racism.
Yes. Right.
If this is still an impact of this legislature, then isn't that still going to be having the same sort of harms to the people
But
that
you
it's
can't-
being directed against?
Okay, I see what you're saying. But you can't say the idea itself, ethnic profiling, is racist if it is abused, usurped by something else, and used as, for example.
Why
all right,
not?
But if that's-
all right, here's why.
Isn't
Here's
one of
why.
the government's biggest
All right,
goals
let
to
me
make
explain.
sure its perception of what
All
it's
right,
doing
let
is
me
also
explain.
good in
For
the eyes of
example,
the
the
people?
government gives policemen guns, right? But if one policeman decides to misuse his gun, does that mean all policemen shouldn't have guns? So it's a fallacy of composition for you to broaden the misuse by the
When this
media
is
to the
applied-
general idea.
When this method that you're talking about is applied, and the government knows from 10 years of empirical examples that this is what it will lead to.
Okay, well,
Why-
first of all,
why
Isn't it the government's
away?
role then to stop
Well,
that from
first of all,
happening?
we're saying that doesn't happen because The Economist wrote that Islamophobia in a nation that uses ethnic profiling, the United States, is much, much less than other nations that don't use ethnic profiling.
But
So
where's the causal link? How do you show that?
you have to show the causal link. We're saying there is
All
not
right,
a
so
causal
if we
link.
show that there is a reason why the Islamophobia would be increased, then
Well, we've shown you reasons why it hasn't that are practical.
like what are those reasons besides the fact that the
Okay.
Economist said so?
Oh, okay, there are plenty of reasons. Would you like me to just explain the
Analytical
analysis?
reasons, yes.
Okay, first of all, The Economist also suggested that it was the media hype surrounding it that caused people to be fear.
But
the
they're
law
still
itself,
afraid, aren't they?
they're
They're going
relatively less.
71% of Americans say they're going to be less afraid. I'm not going to say this is going to solve all their fear. They're going to go on and be hunky dory now, but it's going to decrease fear.
35 seconds. I'll use the rest of our prep time. The speech will mainly be a summary of the key issues brought up in this round. Judges ready? Opponents ready? Okay. The first reason you're going to be voting con is because of our behavioral analysis example that goes completely unrebutted throughout this round. You can re-extend that example, which is telling you behavioral analysis alone proved to be more successful in identifying terrorists than when used in conjunction with ethnic profiling. This shows you that sure, even if ethnic profiling is added as a tool, it's not going to have any benefit. In fact, it's actually going to be worse because without ethnic profiling and only with behavioral profiling, we actually have a better percentage of targeting which people are going to be terrorists. But you avoid that discrimination, whether it come through the media or the people directly. You avoid the harms of discrimination against a particular ethnic group. So you're always going to prefer behavioral profiling because that went completely unrebutted in the round. Behavioral profiling is superior to ethnic profiling and behavioral profiling in conjunction. Second, you're going to prefer our comparative evidence, which showed you that ethnic profiling is just as successful as random screening. They cited 6 examples where ethnic profiling was able to point out terrorists. But our example is showing you ethnic profiling is just as successful as random screening. That their examples were not comparative, and that's more successful than random screening. Our example gave you a statistic is that it's exactly the same as random screening. But with random screening, you avoid the racism that occurs as a result, and you avoid the fear that Muslims have or any ethnic group in ethnic profiling that they have created towards them. Third, people can get around ethnic profiling by just recruiting outside of that ethnicity. We gave you examples of the underwear bomber, Jihad Jane, etc., of where they did not fit the ethnic profiled group, and yet they were still able to commit terroristic or the potential to commit terroristic attacks against the United States. Fourth, the perception this creates. We're not talking about it's directly discriminatory, but the perception it creates amongst American people that certain groups are dangerous. That is inherently unjust. Fifth, the 14th Amendment states there should be equal protection. The 14th Amendment was created to have equality. Thus, for all these reasons, ethnic profiling is unjust. Therefore, you should vote con.
I'll run the rest of my prep time. Okay, thank you. So before I begin, quickly what I'm going to do, I'm just going to go straight down first framework and then voters. Everyone ready? Let's begin. What today's debate boils down to is simply which side actually proved a justification. We're giving you the framework that you're going to weigh. It is justified if it can save lives. It's utilitarian. It's also deontological because it upholds the greatest moral value. Our opponents did not make a lot of moral arguments. They rather focused all of their arguments of is it a means, period, not necessarily is it a just means. So since we've both proven it is a just means and means, we win today's round. The pro wins today's round. Now going on to the specifics. The first independent reason why you're going to vote for the pro is because it decreases terrorism. We've given you statistics. We cited 6 instances in which it has been statistically proven to decrease terrorism without the negative benefits. They didn't provide a counterexample of when it didn't decrease terrorism. The only example they provided was in Texas, which we can't really look to the study anyways because it was not a comparative study. It is just simply when it was banned altogether. They said we need to have comparative studies, but in this case, all they're saying is in a state, Texas, where it was banned, it didn't. Somehow their other techniques increased in work. You can't look to that. You must look to our evidence where we have proven instances where terrorism was averted in 6 independent cases because of ethnic profiling without negative benefits. Now, the second reason why you're going to affirm today's resolution is the ethical impacts, the just impacts. Our opponents are claiming that there happens to be an isolation caused by ethnic profiling and fear of specific groups, but this isn't true. We've shown it to not be true in the United States, and they haven't offered counter evidence, so our evidence still stands. If you look to what fear is caused to society, and this is your third reason, the fear. Terrorism equals fear. Terrorism's play off of fear. We showed you, which went unrebutted the entire time, that people feel more safe if they think ethnic profiling is being used, regardless of how well it is being used. With this Gallup poll, once again, 71% of Americans feel more safe just if ethnic profiling is used, period. Not necessarily if it actually works, just if it's used. So it's the perception. We agree with our opponents. Perception is key to today's round. And because the perception when ethnic profiling is in place and it decreases fear, you can see 3 different reasons why terrorism is averted. First, it decreases fear. Second, it actually decreases the statistical likelihood of terrorist attacks through the Goldilocks principle, and the ethical principle is still upheld where laws are not broken. Thank you. Thus you affirm. Thank you. Do you want to see our stat? Huh? Do you want to see our stat?
Oh, no, thank you.
So I just want to start off by saying I thought this was a fantastic round for both teams. I thought that the cases were constructed really well, that the delivery and fluency was really fantastic, and everyone had, I think, meaningful and interesting evidence and really put a good spin on a lot of these issues. That said, I think that, like both sides sort of ultimately made clear, the round comes down to, one, a question of efficacy. Does ethnic profiling work? And then second, even if it does work, can it then be morally justified? And on the first question, I think that Pro does a good job explaining to me that through these sort of various cases, the 6 across various countries, ethnic profiling obviously has some merit as a way to filter out terrorists or other dissidents or what have you. And I think that they do a good job convincing us of that. But at the end of the day, I think that Khan is right to point out that the statistic is not fundamentally comparative, that ethnic profiling may work, but at the same time, it's no better than other potentially less damaging strategies, such as random profiling or this behavioral thing, which they then actually compound with the analysis that behavioral profiling's efficacy is actually undermined when you have a racial element to it. So I think on the efficacy level, I think it's leaning towards the con. That said, Pro has another good argument, which is, at the end of the day, isn't combating terrorism really about combating fear, and doesn't this do it? And I think they do win the argument that, of course, this reduces fear, so in some way it's a small victory against terrorism. But Con comes back, and this is really where I think they take around on the moral issue, which is, can you actually reduce fear if it comes on the back of basically engendering racism? Of course, Pro argues that this is the fault of the media, but regardless of whose fault it is, I think that Con does an effective job explaining that this is the natural effect of the policy, that the reason why fear is reduced is because you essentially concede to the fear that race is a salient characteristic. And because of that, I think even if they can prove there's some pragmatic efficacy, they really don't pull the day on the moral argument, and for that reason, I vote for the Con team.
So I also voted for the Con team. I want to start off by saying again what Zion said, that this was an excellent round between both teams. I saw a lot of the same and a few things different, which I'll focus on the things that were different. But I do agree. I think the round really came down to, one, is it effective? And then two, even if it's effective, is it moral? And that you'd have to show both to say that ethnic profiling is a just means. On the effective side, I agree a lot with what Zion presented. I think that in reality, neither case, neither example was truly comparative. There was no double-blind study going on here. But what was shown was simply that in times where there's ethnic profiling, it has worked, whereas what was shown with behavioral profiling was it worked better than ethnic profiling had previously. And so that, I think, is slightly stronger evidence, especially when it's tied in with the Texas example. So I think Khan is winning on efficacy. In terms of the moral argument, I actually thought that Pro won this, that had they proven that it had been effective, I would have sided with Pro. And the reason is I don't really think the analysis of it creating backlash is impacted as well as it could have been. So I buy that there might be a little bit of backlash caused by this. I don't buy that there will be much because of some of the rebuttal that was given, that it's blown out of proportion by the media. But I also don't see that simply backlash is enough of an impacted reason to show that the means itself is immoral. So I think Pro won that. But again, I want to say it's an excellent debate, and because we see that it's not effective, I side with Khan.
Like my fellow judges, I awarded the win to Khan, and not to repeat any of the excellent arguments that are already presented, one thing that I think that Khan did a better job of was in the final focus, and specifically they clearly articulated their points, and I think that focusing on the issue in terms of efficacy, in that random profiling was equivalent in efficacy to ethnic profiling, was very strong, and was not countered by Pro at all, who spoke second. And similarly, they used the concept of justice, whether it was a just means, continually throughout the debate. And I think that linkage is key in this debate format, that you always turn back to the resolution and make sure that you are addressing the issue that is stated in the resolution. Thanks.